All right, I think I'm ready to go. So as Michelle said, thank you very much for joining today. We'll go through some introductions, then we'll get into all of the different flavors of planning. We'll cover exactly what is freeform planning, why do we need it, how do we migrate to it, and then we'll actually get to see it. Because I don't know about you guys, when I'm visual, I like to actually see and touch things, so we'll give you guys a chance to actually see it, and then we can go and do some Q&A at the end. All right, so first things first, about me. So I'm Brian Marshall. I'm the VP of Delivery here at US Analytics. I've been doing this over 20 years with US Analytics for a little over 17 years, a few hundred projects in that time frame. I've presented at Kscope pretty close to 20 times, and I'm a frequent blogger at EPMmarshall.com. About US Analytics, so US Analytics is a Dallas-based firm, but we've kind of grown into more of a national-facing firm now with offices kind of on both coasts and in the South. So we've got over 500 clients, over 1,000 implementations, and we really are a full-service provider. So we do everything from assessments to full implementations, all the way down the line to managed services after we get done with our projects. So if you need it, we can probably help you one way or another, as long as it pertains to EPM. So process advisory, infrastructure implementations, everything you can think of EPM related, that's what we're about. So let's get into the meat of freeform planning itself. And we're gonna start off with the flavors of planning. So there really are two main groupings when you purchase EPM Cloud now. And we had our previous webinar kind of discussing the change in licensing for Oracle, and you've got EPM Standard and EPM Enterprise now on the cloud. With EPM Standard, if you set up a planning application though, they've done a pretty good job of making sure that no one really wants to buy Standard, because when you look at EPM Standard, we only get one type of application, and that one type of application has one custom plan type, and that's it, and then all the modules. So if you really are interested in the modules and are really interested in having only one plan type with not a lot of future growth, then you can get away with Standard. But in my experience, most clients want one plan type, and they already have plans for another one before we even get done with the first one. So that leads us down the path of EPM Enterprise. And obviously, independent of just the planning stuff, which we won't talk about the other products today, but EPM Enterprise includes a ton of products plus several different flavors of planning itself. So we have a new one called Custom. So Custom has 6 BSO plan types and 6 ASO plan types, but it doesn't have any of the modules. So you can't ever go back in and say, I'd like to add a module to this. So it kind of locks you out of that. So the other interesting part about this is, since we're on EPM Enterprise, we can have as many of any of these types as we want. So I'm not limited to just one application. I can have as many applications as I want, and of those applications, they can be of any of the different types. So that's the custom type. We then have the module type, and the module version is really what we've been using for many years, and what we would have called EPBCS, the Enterprise Planning and Budgeting Cloud Service beforehand. And it has the three custom BSO, 3 custom ASO, 1 reporting ASO cube, and then the modules on top of that. And then that takes us into Freeform. So Freeform is really more of planning in the cloud. So when we originally got OAC and OAC started to come out and we started to hear things about it, we had, a lot of people were what we'll call it slow to adopt something like that, because it really took all of what we had in Essbase, made it infrastructure as a service, and really more platform as a service, where you have to buy CPUs and things like that. So the licensing model was super complex. It included all of this BI stuff that, if you're just an Essbase user, is cool, but not necessary. And so if you were just trying to take your Essbase applications to the cloud, a lot of our clients started looking at it and going, well, we'll just make our applications fit into planning anyway. So Oracle, I think, has finally figured that out, and OAC has changed a lot, right? So it's now Essbase is getting split out into Essbase 19C, and it's got a different licensing base. It even has a bring your own license option, and that's a whole nother webinar all by itself. But from a planning perspective and from an EPM cloud perspective, we now have an option for all of those standalone Essbase applications to bring those into the cloud without having to pay for all of our infrastructure or all of our platform as a service costs. Now we're just looking at the straight user costs the way we do everything else on the EPM side. So we do get one custom plan type, so that can be either ASO or BSO. And then they've told us that future releases will eventually support more plan types at some point. We don't know when that's going to happen, presumably sometime next year, but it is coming. So in freeform planning, it is planning, but it's planning without a lot of things, but a lot of stuff is still there. So what do we get? We get forms. So take your Essbase on-prem application and let's go ahead and upgrade it with forms. So that's awesome. Our forms have all the things we would be used to seeing on a form inside of planning. We have action menus, we have your right-click menus, data adjustments like grid spread and adjust data, comments, supporting detail, change history with the full set of audit capabilities that planning offers us in the cloud, attachments, validations, dashboards, infolets. So all the cool stuff that we get with PBCS as we were transitioning people anyway to PBCS to replace their Essbase applications, we get all of that. And really the only things as we go through these, the only things we're really not getting are more around process management and workflow, because all of those dimensions that we don't require anymore are not going to be there. So we don't have a scenario dimension, we don't have a version dimension, we don't have years and period the way that planning sees them. So our scenario dimension was reliant on period and years, and our version dimension gave us the copy version functionality. So all of those things related to dimensions that control behavior of the system aren't going to be there. And that's not a bad thing, because that's kind of what we want, right? We want the flexibility to do whatever we're doing in our standalone Essbase applications, just taking those to the cloud. So obviously we don't get workflow and process management since we don't have a scenario, version, period, or years dimension. And since right now we only have one plan type, we don't get Smart Push. If you click around enough, you'll see that there are artifacts of Smart Push still out there. The real question is going to be, will that come back in once we get multiple plan types? I think it will, since it's from an Oracle perspective, it's easier to leave stuff in than it is to rip stuff out. So I think that'll probably find its way back into the application. But right now, we don't have that. So because there's no reason, we only have the one plan type. So why do I need freeform planning? So I've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but it's really about trying to take our on-prem applications that are Essbase only and finding an economical way of getting those to the cloud. Because OAC, when it released, it really wasn't it. A lot of our clients that had larger, more complicated applications that were just Essbase had a lot of trouble finding a place for those to fit into the cloud. OAC wasn't the answer, because for clients that have 32 processors and 32 cores and tons of memory, that was really expensive in OAC. And we had a lot of clients that just flat out said, no, we'll just run hybrid for now. We'll have on-prem Essbase, and then we'll have everything else in the cloud, and eventually we'll get there. So why else might I need freeform planning? Well, if I don't need an account dimension, or if I don't need a specific scenario or period or year dimension, maybe I have one combined time dimension, that I can accomplish things like that in PBCS, but I kind of have to work with PBCS outside of the box, right? I have to go into my plan types and turn off the period and years dimension, which kind of breaks other things and makes things a little bit wonky. So it takes all of that structure that's required as we build a planning application. We go through and we say, here's our account dimension, and we specify what our time dimension looks like when we're setting it up. All that goes away, and now we just have a blank slate, kind of. And we'll get into what I mean when I say kind of a little bit later. But it's perfect for migrating existing Essbase-only applications. So how do we do that? How do we migrate existing applications to the cloud? So they've actually made and we'll see this in the demo, but they've made this super simple, because all we have to do is go through and import our existing outline or existing LCM extract, and that's how we create a freeform planning application. So we'll go through that process, and you guys will get to see it. But it's very simple. It's really tailor-made for replacing on-prem standalone applications. It's not at all really, even at this point in its life cycle as a product, freeform planning does not appear to be used for net new applications, meaning I'm not going to go in there and create something from scratch and we'll talk about why that is here in a bit too, because we really can't. So beyond the outline that we import in that LCM extract, we also have to get our data, our integrations, security, and reports. So how do we do that? So from a data perspective, either you can get it in through your extract with LCM, or you can just do what most of us do, and that's do a level 0 export out of EAS, and then take that native export and either use a job to import it, or use Calc Manager, where you can right-click on an application and import it that way. So getting the data up is pretty straightforward. Where we really get into the mud of the thick of it, where we get a little bit sticky, is the integration side. So not data and how do I get like my historical data, but how do I do all of my automation and all of the stuff that I do to keep the system running going forward. So if we look at the things we use for integrations, load rules are gone, right? They don't exist anymore. So those have to be rewritten. So we either have to take the data the way it was loading in from a load rule and use cloud data management, or we have to figure out a way to modify the files into that native format, which can be the native format, or it can be a column native format. So we have a little flexibility there. So that's one option. Then we also have report scripts. Those don't exist anymore either. So we either have to, again, use cloud data management, or we can use our planning exports. And I leave out the export you can do through Calc Manager here as an option, because I can't automate that yet. So there's no way in the EPM Automate or in the REST API to say do a level 0 export of everything, unless you're in PCMCS, which doesn't really apply. And then the last option we have for report scripts, if it's a small set of data and you're familiar enough with the REST API, you can use the REST API to get data out, especially if it's for another application. MDX queries are also no longer a thing. I mean, we do have MDX in all of our dynamic calcs, and we do have MDX from a perspective of allocations and things like that on the back end of the system. And we can even use MDX to clear data regions, right? But we don't have the ability to just query data using MDX in the cloud. Instead, we have to either use, again, cloud data management, our planning exports, or our REST API to go get that data out. And what you need to do with that data and how you're going to consume that data is going to drive you down which of those paths makes the most sense. All right, so let's talk about security, because security is probably the next biggest sticking point after integrations, because integrations can be, depending on how many things are going into your Essbase cube, you can have a lot of integrations into Essbase. It's not uncommon. So that's normally going to be the biggest chunk of what you do when you go do an implementation of Freeform. The next biggest chunk is probably going to be security. And the reason that is because this is planning style security. It's not Essbase security. So in Essbase, we have the ability to go through and we create a filter, and we give users access to those filters. Those filters also support something that we call matrix security. What is matrix security? Just in case. So I can give user Bob access to account 1 for cost centers 1 and 2, and account 2 for cost centers 3 and 4. But if I go into 3 and 4, I won't see account 1 data, right? So that's matrix security. Planning doesn't support that. In planning, it is all very, very much object level, dimension level security, where I can go in and say user Bob can have access to account 1 and account 2, and user Bob can have access to cost centers 1 through 4, but I cannot specify any kind of matrix security around those two. Now, if I'm just trying to control the entry of data and I don't care if people see things, you can do a combination of the security that we do inside of planning style security, where we do that object level security, and then I can layer on to that valid intersections to prevent data entry where it doesn't belong. So if it's a nonsensical intersection, we can use valid intersections to at least control the flow of data into the system, but we still will be able to see that data. So we can't yet control that data's visibility to users as it pertains to kind of this matrix level. So what that really means is that all of our security has to be rebuilt. So that's going to be a combination of making sure all our users are set up in the system, whether they're single sign-on or native users. We still have to set those up with roles and access to our Freeform pod. And then we also have to go through and set up all of our filters that we had before. We're going to convert those over and make those into our object level security inside of planning. So some of that you can do in a somewhat automated format, especially if you have a lot of those. You can do a certain amount of conversion into, you can go do an extract, figure out the format, put it in there and then import it back in, but we're still talking about more effort, right? It's not just a lift and shift like it could be otherwise. Then we have our reports. As with all things SmartView, some of your retrieves will work, some of your retrieves won't work. I know that's not really heartwarming to hear things like that, but that's kind of been the history of SmartView as a product. Sometimes things just don't work there, and this will be no different. For financial reports, if you're going to try and take an existing financial report against Essbase, you're going to have trouble importing that in because that's going to be built on an Essbase connection, and it's different than a financial report built on a planning connection, which is why we can take a planning report and import them, not so much an Essbase report. So we're either going to have to manipulate the XML on the back end of that to make it match up with the connectivity type and the connection names and everything that are going to match up with taking that to more of a PBCS style planning in the cloud type connection versus being an Essbase one, or we can just go and import that report into management reporting, which used to be part of the EPRCS product set, and then we can just do a rebuild over there. Especially since we're starting to see a shift from Oracle away from FR and toward management reporting and as a replacement product in the future. So how do I create an application from scratch? So the short answer is you don't. And we'll see this as we go through the demo, but when I go through and create an application, I don't have the option to say, just go create me an application that's blank. So you have to create an application either from an outline file or from an LCM export. Why is that? Well, and I think a lot of this comes down to they were trying to get this out as quickly as they could from a product perspective. They wanted this on the market. They wanted everybody that was going to buy this new EPM cloud enterprise product to replace all their on-prem stuff. They wanted it to be able to replace all their on-prem stuff, including our standalone Essbase applications. So as part of that, they took the path of least resistance. And what that meant was trying to keep as few changes necessary to the interface of planning to make Freeform work as possible, because they don't want to maintain just a ton of changes across the different types. So what that means is if you ever look at a dimension inside of planning, I don't specify what dimension type a dimension is in planning when I create one, right? Because if I'm creating a dimension in planning, I'm creating a custom dimension. All of my other dimensions get created during the process of setup and configuration of the application. My account dimension is automatically there and is of type account. My entity dimension is automatically there and of type entity. My time dimensions, period and year, they're already there. So we don't have the option. There's no drop-down box as we go through and edit a dimension or add a dimension that says, make this one a time dimension. And maybe that'll come at some point as Freeform develops and matures as a product, but right now it's not there. So what if I really want to anyway? Because I really want to start with a Freeform map. I don't want to use the dimensions that are built in. Well, there's only really one workaround for this, and that's to go back to your old buddy on-prem, or find a friend that has on-prem and can create you an outline and essentially create the skeletal structure of what you're trying to build from a dimensionality perspective. So create an account dimension, create an entity dimension, create a time dimension, all the things you need to make things like time balance work. Create any of those things in that skeletal outline. It doesn't have to have members. It doesn't have to have anything else. Just really the dimension types and properties associated with those dimensions. That's all we really care about. And then you can import that skeletal outline and finish out your build. We don't even care about custom dimensions. We really only care about in that outline having the dimensions that we need to be of a specific type, account, entity, time. So that's the long-winded 20-minute introduction to what Freeform planning really is. Now we're going to spend 5 or 10 minutes, and this will be a quick webinar. I just want to give you guys a taste of what it actually looks like. How do we create one? And then we can go into some Q&A. So with that, I will switch over from this and go back out to Chrome.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, Brian, I'm going to launch another poll really fast, and you can just let me know when you're ready.
Okay. All right, I think I'm ready when you are, Michelle.
Okay, great.
All right, so when we create a planning application inside of the new version of PBCS, so if you're on an older release of PBCS and you delete your application and you create it from scratch, it doesn't look like this. It looks different. We have an older pod. It looks different than this. So we still have the sample application. We still have the option to go in and look at our snapshots, and we can import things. But we now have the start button for create a new application for planning. So when I click start, we're going to see a whole new screen that looks a lot like an old screen, but isn't quite the same. And what you'll see is we have application type at the bottom. And we have to be a little bit careful here. So we have custom, freeform, and modules, just like we talked about at the very beginning. I'm going to accidentally select custom just so you guys can see what happens when you do this, because you do have to be careful. When I click custom, I now no longer have the ability to change it, which is super annoying, by the way. So now if I want to come back and do this again, I really have to start all the way back over. So I'm just going to go get rid of everything off the end here, reload it, and then I'm going to start from scratch because I really want a free format. So just a tidbit. I don't know why that is. I'm sure there's some coding reason on the back end. We're going to go ahead and use the old school sample basic application just to do a quick import so you guys can take a look around and see what things really look like. So we're going to select freeform, and you'll notice we have application setup, which is a dropdown. So that tells me eventually we may have the ability to do from scratch, perhaps. But for right now, we only have one option, and that's either an LTM or a cube outline. So I'm going to choose a local cube outline, and then I'm going to go into my downloads here and just type in basic. That's where I've got it. So it's going to upload that file right now. So if you have a very large cube, say you have 100,000 members in your cube and you upload that, it can take a really long time, depending on your internet connection, depending on Oracle's internet connection of the day. It can take a while. I mean, I've taken a few very large outlines for testing, and you have a 200,000 member outline. It could take you 15, 20 minutes just to do the upload. Not to mention what we're going to do next. So we've specified everything now. We've got the basic outline already set up. We're going to click next. And that's it. That's all we get to do from a setup perspective. It's gonna recap everything. So that's the name we specified. This is the application type, very basic. So now we're going to create it, and it's going to go through and essentially take that outline and convert it into planning. Now this process will take as short or as long as your outline is. So if you have 100 members in your outline, this will go pretty quickly. The one that we're doing right now will probably take 30 seconds or less because sample basic is pretty small. By contrast, if you do take a big ASO cube, even the ASO SAMP app that came with Essbase has 20,000 members in it. That might take 5 or 10 minutes to execute. So this one was pretty quick because it's pretty small. So we'll go ahead and say okay. And now it's gonna go ahead and take us into the application. Now, the first thing I like to do is go through, and what you'll see is we still have jobs, we still have everything we normally have in PBCS, with a few exceptions that we already talked about. But we're going to go to jobs, and the reason I want to go in here is we get to see a few things about what just happened. So the first step is just that it created a database, and that's it. We don't really get any other details. Okay, I've created a database. That's great. Next step, this is the one we kind of care about, right? This is processing the actual outline. So this tells us all the different dimensions that it just brought in, how many members were there, and how many are stored. Then if we scroll down, we get to see even more information about what actually was created on the flip side. The thing that you will find in here is this is not always going to tell you if there's an error or if there are issues or what those issues might be. So I took a pretty complex ASO app with several 100,000 members in there, and it imported everything fine. And then when I looked at, and I can't do it for the demo because it takes too long, but if I looked at, say, the product dimension, my product dimension had 349,000 members in mine. And then when I scrolled down to this section for the target cube, so up here in the source, it had 349,000. Down here in the actual product dimension for target, it had 0 members. It just skipped that dimension altogether. It took forever doing it, but it skipped it altogether. And I have not yet been able to ascertain, because it takes a while to go through each time and do it. I have not yet been able to figure out kind of what that limit is. I know I have successfully imported an outline with 200,000 members with no problem. It takes a while, but I was able to see all of those members once I get in, and that's kind of where we'll head next, right? So, and you'll see it's telling you all this other stuff is going to be completely excluded when it comes in. So no report scripts, no load rules, all that stuff is going away when we do our import. Our drill through detail, all that stuff goes away. It's very basic, just the outline. So let's close that, and now we can go back over to our dimensions. And we'll look at a couple of things in dimensions that are of interest. You know, first we can go to each dimension and kind of see what's there. But if we click our drop-down box, we'll see all of our classic, sample, basic, everybody's favorite beverage companies dimensions. So if we look at our measures dimension, though, what we'll notice is if we click on profit and edit that dimension member, it imported it as an account dimension. And we can tell that because we have variance reporting and account type, right? We've got time balance. All these different things that we have in an account dimension inside of planning, it picked up. So this is reason number one why we can't just go create one from scratch. There's no, if I go look conversely, if I go look over here at the dimension itself, and there's no button in here, there's no drop down that says make this an account dimension. You know, give me all those extra options. It doesn't exist. So now let's go take a look at another dimension, maybe the years dimension. So what we'll notice here, we have a, you know, sample basic has a blended dimension here. So if we go into this one, we'll already see this is a time dimension, right? We see our base periods, fiscal year, all that stuff is already in there. And we can go in and look at our options and see everything. One question I've had is, okay, and now I see all my years. What if I want to add a year called no year? So this is clearly a time dimension. What if I want to add no year, which we can't do in planning, right? If I try and add no year, it's not there. Then modules get it, but we can't have it. I can go in here and without any issue, I can add no year. So we have, it's still a time dimension. We still have the ability to go in and configure all of our dynamic time series. So this is why we have to use an outline to start with, because it's going to get all of that information from the outline that this is a time-based dimension, that this is a dimension that is going to have the settings for time balance and dynamic time series and all of those things. So that's why all of this is important. So if we look at everything else, though, we still have forms. We still have all of our business rules. We can still go through and see all of our jobs and valid intersections. Everything else is still here. So it's really taking our on-prem Essbase application that may just be a basic either reporting cube, it may have a little bit of lock-ins in here and there, but we're giving that whole Essbase standalone, very limited functionality compared to planning, and we're enhancing it and giving it everything that planning can do now, with very few exceptions. Like I said, workflow is not there, currency conversion is not going to be there. Outside of those basic things, though, everything else is still here. I can still do announcements. It's still really a planning cube. It's just a planning cube that is completely free form, as the name would indicate. So overall, that's kind of what we've got. So hopefully everybody found this helpful to kind of see it and feel it and kind of see what the limitations are and kind of understand what you can and can't do with it. And now we'll kind of turn it over to Q&A, and if anybody has any questions, you can send those over to Michelle, and she will ask me those questions now, and we can try and get those answered for you.
Awesome. Yeah, if you don't know, you can submit your questions in the little question section. We do have a few already. The first question is, how many freeform applications can we create in the standard and enterprise editions?
So in standard edition, freeform does not exist. So if you need freeform, you cannot get that on standard. It's just not an option. When you create a standard application, it comes with one pod, and that's included in your licensing fee. If you want to add another pod to your standard version, then it's $2,500 per month per pod. And however many users you had will all get access to that pod. The big challenge there is, no matter how many I set up, I still can't get freeform, and I still can't get more than one custom plan type. So if I try and use standard and then try and throw pods at it, I'm very rapidly going to reach a point where it would have been cheaper, most likely, to go enterprise than it is to just try and set it up through standard. So that's the first part of that question. Second part is, how many can I get on enterprise? And the answer would be, Yes, as many as you want is what we're told. I'm sure at some point somebody will test the limits of that, but as of right now, you get unlimited pods, and that's it. There is no limit that has been set by Oracle today. I'm sure somebody will ruin that for us at some point, but right now there's no limit.
Okay, next question. What is the difference between custom and module applications?
So the custom application, the best way I can describe this is it's really the number of custom plan types. So if I have, say I have an existing application on-prem and it has 3 custom BSO plan types and a workforce planning app and a CapEx planning app, both modules, right? So those are all sunset and we need to migrate them, but we don't want to rebuild workforce planning into a module today. Maybe we'll get there, but right now we just want to lift and shift to the cloud. Custom gives us enough plan types with 6 on the BSO side and 6 on the ASO side that I can go and import basically a fully baked system with all of the modules implemented on-prem. I can migrate that whole thing with a little bit of effort on the back end. We have to modify the LCM extract a little bit to do it, but you can migrate that whole application as one and not have to worry about it. It also means I can have one application with 6 custom plan types. So if you're not into the modules, custom is kind of the way to go. If you think you're ever going to use the modules though, and you don't need more than 3 BSO plan types, I would set up my application as modules. And that's something we just kind of have to determine as we go through either an assessment or the initial requirements phase of an implementation to understand what is your future state. And the good news is I can always set up another pod even if we make the wrong decision. So we're not always tied in. Businesses change, and now that we have the enterprise version that allows us that flexibility and scalability, we don't have to worry quite as much about making a choice that's going to impact us negatively forever.
Okay, so next question is, Freeform can create both BSO and ASO applications?
That is correct. You can only get one at a time, but you can import an ASO cube or a BSO cube, and I have tested both. I do know that if you're importing an ASO cube and it has a significant number of complex calculations, you may have to scale back your outline and then do a little bit of manual importing, because I tried a few of my more complex ASO applications just to try it out, and I got a fair number of failures without having to scale back some of my more complex account-based MDX calculations. So just depends.
And this next question, I believe, is specific to the demo. Where do you specify ASO, BSO, or hybrid?
The outline that you're pulling in, it makes that specification for you. As far as hybrid goes, that is an excellent question. I hadn't actually thought of trying to do a hybrid one. You may have to do a request to get the hybrid piece turned on, because I'm not sure you can turn it on this is a BSO one, let's see. And it's not, the options that we would have are not here. So I think the answer is you're likely going to have to talk to Oracle. Oh, well, actually, take a look. It is enabled. So it's already hybrid when it imported it. It didn't ask me. So I think the answer is, by default, it has taken my basic application that was sample basic. So it was not hybrid enabled, because part of the challenge is when I enable hybrid on-prem, it's done in the configuration file of Essbase. So the outline has no awareness of the fact that hybrid is either enabled or disabled. That's determined elsewhere. So if all it's doing is processing the outline file, it makes sense that it has to make a choice. And the new default going forward in all of EPM Cloud is going to be hybrid. So it makes sense that it would import it directly into a hybrid cube.
Okay, next question. Do Calc Scripts get imported as business rules?
So if you do I was having trouble with my LCM extracts. I couldn't get them to come in yet. So right now I've only tested out the outline portion of it. I may do a follow-up blog post or something that will show what happens if you do that. So I don't know the answer to that question. It would stand to reason it would be nice if that functionality was there. Part of me says it's not going to do it anyway, but it would be nice if it did. So I will let you know.
So next question, can you clarify how many ASO and BSO cubes planning in both standard and enterprise can create per application?
Sure. So in standard, we only get one BSO custom plan type, and that's it. In enterprise, if you select custom, you get 6 BSO, 6 ASO, and in modules, you get 3 ASO, 3 BSO, and 1 ASO reporting plan type, which is really, to me, a 4th ASO plan type, but it's still different.
Okay, is there something comparable to workflow? Two-part question. Also, can you provide a quick overview of valid intersections?
So for workflow, there's really nothing comparable built into Freeform because workflow requires something called an approval unit, and which used to be called a planning unit, which involved like the planning unit hierarchy around the entity dimension and everything. So there's several requirements for workflow to work. The main requirement is an entity dimension, and since Freeform doesn't require an entity dimension, we can't necessarily have workflow. The other thing is now I have a planning unit that I have to go define and set up, and that's just not in here. So there's no place in here for me to go look at my approval units or anything associated with that. So workflow has been, for now, ripped out. I don't know that there's going to be a good way for them to pull it in. Maybe if you have an entity dimension, it will show up magically at some point, but it's not in here for now. As far as valid intersections, the point behind valid intersections is kind of what I talked about, where I can go in and specify for this account, for account 1, I'm going to say that I can only enter data at certain other dimensional intersections. So for account 1, maybe that account 1 is only valid for cost center 1 and 2. And for account 2, maybe it's valid for cost center 3 and 4. And so it's kind of a way to do similar to what we would do in Essbase security from a matrix perspective, but all it will control is the input of data. It does not prevent users from seeing things. It does not prevent the backend system from loading data to those intersections, but it will prevent an end user and gray out cells for an end user if it doesn't meet the valid intersections requirements.
Okay, can you stand up custom and modules and freeform?
So if you're on, to get all 3 of those, you have to be on the EPM cloud enterprise, right? You can't be on standard. So if you're on enterprise, you can set up as many of those pods as you want. You just have to request the number of pods you want. And then for each of the pods that you set up, it will allow you to set it up as whichever of those 3 you want.
Can we create freeform planning applications from ASO, BSO, and hybrid?
ASO, yes. Hybrid, yes. BSO, I guess, is kind of a question when we think about it. I mean, BSO in a hybrid sense, yes. The question is, can and I don't know the answer to this. I'll have to ask somebody at Oracle. Because if I go to the overview of my app, it imported my BSO cube as a hybrid cube automatically. So that tells me if you want it to not be hybrid, you may have to make a request into Oracle to turn that off. Because I know if you're on, kind of like if you're on an old version of PBCS today and you want hybrid, you can have it, but you have to request it. So it would stand to reason then you could maybe be able to do the same thing to get it back into classic BSO if that's what you want.
Can the ASO cube outline be imported?
Yes.
Okay, next question. We have CapEx application on-prem with the size of 450 gigabytes. Can Enterprise Cloud support that?
Can Enterprise Cloud support that? Yes. Should Enterprise Cloud support that is a different question. I mean, if you've got a cube that's already 450 gig, the first thing we should probably start looking at is whether or not it should be 450 gig, because that's pretty big. That means all of your restructures and things like that are going to take forever. So if you're doing a dense restructure on a 450 gig cube, I can only imagine how long that's taking. But it's got to be a long time. So I would say, can it do it? Yes. They do have the limitation on the cloud that's kind of been rolled back some. The original limit was 250 gig for everything. But I can tell you, I've got a number of clients that have exceeded that number by a factor of 4 and had no problem and have had nothing deleted. So I would just, again, I would take a look at that application and want to understand why that application is so big, and make sure that it makes sense for it to be that big.
Okay, in OSC Essbase Classic User Interface, under Files, you can download the OTL. Can this OTL be used to create your Freeform app?
As long as it's an actual outline file that I could, and the easy way to test that is, well, one, you could try it on here. The other option is if you can open it in EAS, it should be able to be opened here. It's just a proprietary file format, so I can't imagine there's any difference in that outline versus this outline.
Okay, let me see. We have a lot of questions, by the way. We're going to do our best to get to all of them. If not, we will reach back out and answer your question privately. Okay, so let me see here. I'm not sure if you already answered this or not. Where do we specify in Freeform Planning on BSO?
So it automatically determines BSO or ASO based on the outline. The outline itself contains that definition, so but that's not something you get to select.
Okay, yeah, we have several questions about that, so I think you've covered that part. The comments and forms, can we edit them as well? In our on-prem 11.124 planning, we can just add comments but cannot edit them.
So the whole comment structure inside of PBCS is a little bit more extensive than it was. And I don't actually, since I just imported this from scratch, yes, the comment system allows you to edit, delete, and respond to other people's comments. So if I open up a comment on a cell, I will actually see all of the comments that have been made to that cell, and I have the ability to edit or delete them.
Okay. Okay, so if it is hybrid by default, will it have restrictions on the number of rules and other restrictions of hybrid?
I mean, given that it's hybrid, it's going to have certain restrictions. I know that they've added some of the query limiters and things like that to protect the system and to protect users from themselves. So it stands to reason we're going to have those. We already know those are going to be in place, and they're starting to. Excuse me. They're starting to add more of those as we kind of go forward. So I would imagine we'll keep seeing things like that. As far as limitations on the rules, PBCS and the whole EPM cloud platform right now is still on System 11 Essbase. So given that it's on System 11 Essbase, it's going to have the restrictions that we have that are pretty close to what we had in 11.124. At some point that may change, but I don't know how close or far away that is. It would be a fairly seismic shift to move away from that over to like 19C. Okay.
Can Calc Scripts and Essbase take prompts like business rules and planning?
Well, that's an interesting question. Number one, Calc Scripts don't exist in the cloud. So in the cloud, it has to be a business rule one way or another. On-prem, if you're on 11.124, Calc Scripts can now take prompts, and that they've built that functionality all the way into Smart2U. So you can execute a calculation script in Smart2U on-prem with prompts today with 11.124.
Is there a way to get Freeform if we are a PBCS customer with no immediate plans to convert to enterprise?
Not that I am aware of, and trust me, I've tried.
Okay.
Your best bet would be to negotiate with Oracle. If you're coming close to the end of your licensing, say you were on a 3-year plan and you're 2 years and 11 months into it, you have a pretty good shot of getting something if they can convert you over. And what I have found in working with several Oracle reps is there is no path to convert from PBCS to an enterprise license of EPM Cloud. And what that means is if I'm a PBCS customer and now I am relicensing to go enterprise cloud, that PBCS instance will continue to exist until I have burned through my license, which maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, whatever you signed up for. And if I want to move that application now over to EPM Cloud Enterprise, I actually have to physically lift and shift that application to a new pod on my new instance of EPM Cloud. So keep that in mind. You can't today. Now, this may change in the future, but today, if you're an existing PBCS customer and you want to go to enterprise, you have to relicense and kind of wait for that old license to die. And if you've got a good Oracle rep, they'll figure out a way to make it work, but there's still going to be some work effort in transitioning that over to your new pod.
So in Standard and Enterprise Edition, if I want to enable more than one product, like FCCS and PBCS, then what is needed to be done? Do we have to go through, I guess they're asking through Oracle to ask for another pod?
So on Enterprise, it's a little easier because you get unlimited pods. On Standard, if you want an additional pod, so when you buy Standard, you get the 4 business processes. You get FCCS, PBCS, ARCS, and EPRCS. But when you set it up, unless you pay extra money, you only get one of those that can be activated at any time. Another one. So say I bought EPM Standard and I'm using PBCS. Now, if I want to add an additional pod, say I want to enable FCCS, I have to go pay $2,500 per month $2,500 per month for the remainder of my contract to Oracle to get that to actually become active. So there's a dollar spend associated with doing it in Standard that doesn't exist in Enterprise.
Okay. Hybrid enabled to just BSO, you mentioned it's a request to Oracle. Does that mean you have to open a service request and Oracle can update the configuration file?
Yes, but be very, very careful doing so, because you need to, when you go to hybrid, just like in on-prem, if you're going to hybrid, your cube is going to behave completely differently. And you just have to be careful that you don't mess anything up when you're doing that, because you have to go change all of your upper level dimensions to dynamic and all of that to make it actually work correctly. So just be careful. Don't assume that you can just flip the switch and it will automatically fix all the things about your cube. You still have to go modify your cube to take advantage of hybrid.
Current Standard and Enterprise Edition is on which version of Essbase?
System 11 something. We don't really get any visibility into what it is, but it's not 19C yet.
Is the SmartView connection a planning connection or an Essbase connection?
So with EPM Cloud Standard and a new release of Essbase, it is always going to be a planning ad hoc connection. So it's always going to be, and it's no longer called planning. It's now just an EPM Cloud connection. The good news is that the EPM Cloud connection now has been updated significantly to allow for all of the things that the Essbase connector allowed for. So the point of view being inside the grid and not a floating stupid box, that's now part of the EPM Cloud connector that didn't exist in planning ad hoc and doesn't still exist in planning ad hoc on-prem. Now, to get that set up, you do have to go into the settings of your application, because I don't know if it comes by default, but there's actually a setting inside of here to enable the advanced features of SmartView. I have to remember where it is. There. Believe it's this one. So you have native and standard. I can't remember which is which at the moment, but one of these, and it's actually already in whatever version of PBCS you're on, but there's a giant gotcha on this. If I have built a SmartView retrieve using what we would have considered the planning ad hoc adapter, and I do a retrieve, and now I'm good, everything works, and I have my stupid floating point of view box, and then I decide I'm going to go through and change this behavior to be the new version. It now, if I go do a refresh of that same retrieve that just worked 30 seconds ago, it's going to give me a nasty message that says, hey, this grid doesn't work anymore, go rebuild it. So, which is kind of in contrast to how it used to be. I mean, it used to be if I had an old version of SmartView and I refreshed in a new version, it would still give me a nastygram, but it would do it. And sometimes it would even work. In the new version, if I turn this functionality on to make it more like the Essbase ad hoc, it just flat out says no and makes you go rebuild it from scratch. So be careful in enabling this, but especially if you're a new client, make sure you're on the new version because nobody likes the floating point of view box. There's a bunch of other reasons why you also want the new version, because it also supports multiple grids on one tab and all that kind of stuff. So there's 100 reasons why you want that. Just be careful. If you're an existing client, it's not always that easy.
Is planning admin extension still an option?
Yes, the planning admin extension, it's more than an option. It's kind of the path forward. If you look at the dimension editor that exists today, even the one we were just looking at, this dimension editor is going away. I mean, they've said it in every update for probably the last year now. Now they've delayed it over and over, but eventually this interface that we're looking at right now, this is supposed to be going away. It is going to be sunset at some point because you're supposed to come in and go do it from inside the application itself. And that interface, the interface over here where I can go change all my dimensions and change all my settings and everything, this is more of a web-based version of what we see inside of SmartView. So that admin extension is going to be your friend for the long haul. It's not going to go away anytime soon.
All right, I think those are all the questions I'm seeing right now. If you have any other questions for us, please reach out. My email, it was in the confirmation email, and we're also going to be sending out the replay by tomorrow or Monday, so look for that. And there's also a very quick 2-question survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. Brian, did you have anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thank you very much for everybody that joined and for all the great questions. At least I can tell people are listening, so I love that. And we'll look forward to the next webinar.
All right, bye everyone.